My parents called me the burden for over 2 decades, the expensive mistake, the financial drain, the shadow behind my golden sister's light. I was the one forced to apologize on my knees for crimes I didn't commit, while my sister, Chloe, was worshipped as a literal saint. For most of my life, I lived as a ghost in my own home, humiliated and shamed by the very people who were supposed to love me most. I couldn't believe the cruelty they could pack into a single glance, but 6 weeks ago, the golden child got a little too drunk and a little too honest. She thought I was still the weak girl she could treat like a doormat, but she didn't realize I was recording every single second of her shocking confession. She'd been waiting her whole life to brag, and she admitted to the lied, the infidelity to our family bond, and a financial betrayal so massive it would leave our parents bankrupt and broken. I held 14 minutes of absolute the truth in my pocket, waiting for the one stage where they couldn't turn the lights off or look away. When my father stood up at our massive family reunion to tell 68 relatives that I was the only daughter he wasn't proud of, I knew it was time. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, and I didn't beg for a seat at their table. Instead, I walked straight to the projector and hit play. What happened next wasn't just a revelation. It was a total collapse of the golden facade that had kept me in the dark for as long as I can remember. The room went silent. The masks fell, and the burden finally became the one holding all the power. This is the story of how a single recording turned family drama into a battle for justice, and how I finally reclaimed my dignity from the ashes of a backstabbed life. I'm Jasmine, I'm 28, and 3 weeks ago my entire world was set on fire by the people who were supposed to protect me. Imagine standing in a ballroom at the Oakwood Estate, surrounded by 68 relatives, all eyes on you while your father grabs the microphone. You expect a toast to family, but instead you get a public execution of your self-worth that leaves you feeling completely humiliated. My father looked directly at my sister Chloe with a pride so thick it was suffocating and cleared his throat for everyone to hear. He announced that he only had one true daughter he was proud of, the one who made the family name shine. I stood there, a glass of water trembling in my hand, officially labeled as the financial burden of the Thornton legacy. The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence where I could feel the pity and the shamed looks from aunts and cousins I barely knew. I wasn't just backstabbed, I was erased in front of a live audience by my own flesh and blood. It was the kind of family betrayal that doesn't just hurt, it leaves a scar on your soul that never truly fades. I looked at Chloe, the golden child, who was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she just smirked. She didn't defend me, didn't look away. She just soaked in the infidelity of our father's love like it was her birthright. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, wondering how 28 years of existence could be reduced to a punchline. I couldn't believe that after everything I had done to prove I was enough, I was still the invisible girl at the corner of the table. The karma I've been waiting for felt miles away, and the weight of being the family's mistake felt like it was finally going to crush me. But as the laughter started to bubble up around the room, I felt something else, a cold, sharp edge of vengeance. They thought they knew the whole story, but they were only reading the cover that my parents had carefully written for decades. My father sat down, satisfied with his cruelty, and my mother patted his hand as if he'd just delivered a sermon. They had no idea that I was carrying a secret in my pocket that would turn this family drama into a crime scene. This wasn't just one bad night. This was a 22-year marathon of being the expensive mistake because I dared to be born premature. My parents never let me forget the hospital bills that ruined their early savings, turning my very survival into a lifelong debt. While Chloe was the miracle, I was the invoice, the family betrayal, starting from the very first breath I took in that incubator. Every birthday was a reminder of the hierarchy, with Chloe getting the parties and me getting the "we have to be careful this year" speech. I grew up listening to cruel jokes about my cost, feeling my self-worth erode every time my father laughed about how much better their life would be without me. It was a masterclass in favoritism where I was always pushed to the dark corner of the dinner table. I was the scapegoat for every broken vase, every late bill, and every ounce of stress that touched our household. They invested in Chloe's dreams, her lessons, and her wardrobe, while I was told to be grateful for hand-me-downs and silence. I couldn't believe how easily they justified the infidelity of their affection, treating one child like royalty and the other like a servant. The humiliated feeling of being the problem child followed me through school, even though I was the one with the straight A's. My achievements were ignored because they didn't fit the narrative of me being the burden they had to carry. I watched Chloe get the love I craved, while I was left to wonder if I was even human to them. I spent 2 decades trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me, constantly feeling backstabbed by their indifference. I studied accounting, and later specialized in forensic work, building a foundation of dignity while my mother spent hours brushing Chloe's hair, telling her she was destined for greatness. The justice of a normal childhood was a luxury I was never permitted to experience in that house of mirrors. But you can only push someone into the shadows for so long before they learn how to navigate the dark better than you. I learned to watch, to listen, and to notice the cracks in their perfect, golden child that they were too blinded by favoritism to see. Little did they know, the burden was actually the only one paying attention to the lied and secrets rotting their foundation. The turning point happened when I was 14, a year that should have been about growing up, but was instead about being broken. My grandmother Edith lost a vintage pearl necklace, a family heirloom that she cherished more than anything in the world. Before the search even began, my mother pointed a finger at me, her eyes full of a terrifying, cold betrayal. I was hauled into the living room, a circle of judgmental faces staring me down like I was a common criminal. I pleaded my innocence, crying until my throat was raw, but my father just shook his head and called it a shocking lack of character. They forced me to get on my knees and apologize to Edith, a moment of shamed memory that still makes my skin crawl. For weeks, I was grounded, my few belongings searched daily, while Chloe watched from the hallway with a look of fake sympathy. I felt the karma of a crime I didn't commit weighing on my shoulders, making me feel like a monster in my own home. My self-worth hit rock bottom as I realized that my own parents preferred a lie over believing in me. 2 months later, I was putting away laundry and found the pearls hidden deep inside Chloe's jewelry box, tucked under a velvet lining. My heart stopped. I literally threw up in the sink from the sheer weight of it. This was the truth, the proof that I wasn't the thief they had painted me out to be. I ran to my parents, showing them the necklace, expecting an apology, a hug, or at least a look of regret. Instead, my mother snatched it away and told me to stop trying to stir up trouble, and that Chloe must have just found it and forgotten. No one apologized for the weeks of punishment or the public humiliated I endured in front of the extended family. It was then that I realized justice didn't exist in this house, only the protection of the golden child. That was the day the last string of my heart snapped, leaving me cold and calculated in a way a 14-year-old should never be. I stopped crying, stopped begging for their love, and started planning my escape from their twisted version of family drama. I knew then that one day I wouldn't just find the truth, I would make sure everyone was forced to look at it. The day I turned 18, I didn't wait for a celebration that was never coming. I walked out with 2 suitcases and a heart full of vengeance. While my parents were busy throwing a massive send-off party for Chloe's expensive private university, I was signing up for 2 jobs. I was determined to build a life where my self-worth wasn't determined by their cruel, biased ledgers. I spent 4 years working graveyard shifts at a diner and studying for my degree during the day, fueled by pure, unadulterated spite. I graduated at the top of my class with 0 debt, a feat that should have been celebrated as a massive justice. But when I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, the seats I had reserved for my family were painfully empty. They were too busy attending Chloe's Greek life events, funding her lifestyle of luxury while I was counting every penny for rent. I saw the photos on Facebook, the smiles, the toasts, the lie they told about how both their daughters were doing so well. They didn't even know the name of my university, yet they claimed my success as their own good parenting in public. Chloe was the nurse in the making, the noble savior of the family, while I was just the accountant who doesn't call home. My parents bragged about her status to everyone at church, while I was the one actually building a life from the ground up. The contrast was a daily dose of family betrayal that I used as fuel to keep my bank account growing. I became an expert at seeing what others missed, a skill that made me a great forensic accountant and an even better observer of my family's decay. I stayed just close enough to hear the echoes of their lives, waiting for the moment the golden child would finally trip over her own ego. I knew that the image they worshipped was a house of cards, and I was just waiting for the right breeze. I couldn't believe how they looked down on my hard work while throwing money at Chloe's endless expenses and study retreats. But being the invisible one has its perks. You see everything when people think you're not even in the room. And what I started to see through the social media posts and brief phone calls was a pattern of infidelity to the truth. The first crack appeared at a random coffee shop downtown, miles away from the neighborhood where my parents bragged about their perfect lives. I saw Chloe's former roommate, a girl who looked like she'd seen a ghost when she realized I was the burden sister. We talked for 20 minutes, and that's when the shocking reality of Chloe's life started to bleed through the polish. She hadn't graduated from nursing school. In fact, she'd been kicked out in her second year for failing grades and unprofessional conduct. My heart hammered against my ribs. For 3 years, she had been pretending to go to shifts, wearing scrubs, and calling herself an RN to the family. The lies were so deep, so layered, that it was almost impressive if it wasn't so completely betrayal. I sat in my car afterward, the steering wheel cold in my hands, feeling a strange mix of horror and a dark, rising sense of payback. I felt a physical sickness in my gut. How could she be so reckless with their dreams? My parents were still telling everyone at the local club that their daughter was saving lives, while she was likely spending their money on anything but tuition. This wasn't just a small fib. This was a total family betrayal of their trust and their bank account. I started digging, using my skills as a forensic accountant to look into the educational funds my parents were so proud of providing. If she wasn't in school, where was the $5,000 a month for housing and clinical fees actually going? The more I looked, the more the family drama transformed into a full-blown financial disaster that they were blindly subsidizing. I felt a surge of self-worth I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the burden. I was the only one in that family with a shred of honesty. Chloe was a parasite, living off the favoritism that had been stolen from me since the day I was born. I couldn't believe how easy it was for her to look them in the eye and lie while they looked at me with such disdain. I didn't call them, and I didn't confront her. I knew that if I spoke too soon, they would just find a way to blame me for her stress. I needed more than just a conversation. I needed a mountain of evidence that even my father couldn't ignore. I began reclaiming my power in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the monster they had created. My investigation took a darker turn when I offered to help my mother with her new tablet, giving me a moment where she left me alone with it. What I saw wasn't just tuition money disappearing. It was a systematic draining of their entire retirement fund, transaction by transaction. Their tablet still had all the automatic logins saved, and the market adjustments were actually 6-figure transfers to Chloe. It was a cold-blooded backstab. Chloe had gained access to their online passwords and was siphoning their future to fund her golden lifestyle. She was literally stealing the roof from over their heads while they sat at dinner and praised her for being so successful and independent. The infidelity to the family bond was so extreme it made my stomach churn with a mix of rage and pity. I watched my father talk about retiring next year, his eyes bright with a hope that I knew was backed by an empty bank account. Chloe would just nod, sipping her expensive wine, and tell them they deserved a rest, all while her phone buzzed with the latest transfer alert. It was a level of betrayal that went beyond anything I had ever imagined possible in my own home. I felt the weight of justice pulling at me. Should I stop it now, or let them feel the consequences of their blind favoritism? But if I just told them, they'd call me a liar, a jealous sister trying to ruin Chloe's reputation. I needed to catch her in the act, to get her to admit it in a way that couldn't be explained away as a mistake. The karma was coming, and it was going to be more expensive than my birth hospital bill ever was. I started documenting every transfer, every date, and every fake nursing license update Chloe sent to the family group chat. I was building a cage out of their own lead, and the door was about to swing shut on the golden child forever. I realized that my parents' burden was actually the only one who could save them from the daughter they actually loved. The irony was a bitter pill, but it gave me a sense of dignity I had never known. I held their entire world in my hands. But before I could act, a new threat emerged. Grandma Edith's will was about to be signed, and Chloe was already sharpening her knife. Grandma Edith was getting older, and with her health declining, the vultures were starting to circle the Oakwood Estate. Chloe suddenly became the most devoted granddaughter in history, visiting every weekend with flowers and a fake smile that made me sick. She was positioning herself to be the sole heir, using family betrayal as a tool to cut everyone else, especially me, out of the picture. I watched her whisper in Edith's ear about how struggling I was and how I didn't really value family traditions like she did. It was a calculated attempt at backstabbing my relationship with the only person who had ever shown me a shred of genuine kindness. Chloe wanted it all: the house, the savings, and the final victory of leaving me with absolutely nothing. The family drama was reaching a fever pitch as the lawyers were called to update the testament at the upcoming family reunion. My parents were fully on board, telling Edith that Chloe was the responsible one who could manage the legacy for everyone. I couldn't believe the audacity of a woman who was actively stealing from her parents, trying to claim a moral ground for an inheritance. I visited Edith myself, but I didn't beg for money or badmouth my sister. I just sat with her and listened to her stories. I saw the way she looked at me. There was a spark of suspicion in her eyes when Chloe was mentioned, a tiny crack in the golden armor. But Edith was old school. She needed more than just a feeling to change her mind about the family's darling. The humiliated feeling of being sidelined while my sister played the saint was almost too much to bear. But I kept my focus. I knew that the reunion was the only stage big enough for the truth to have its full, devastating impact on our social circle. I was reclaiming my place in this family, not through greed, but through a desperate need for the truth to finally breathe. Chloe thought she was a master of manipulation, but she forgot one thing. I had spent 28 years learning how to survive her. I was about to give her the payback of a lifetime, but I needed one more piece of the puzzle to make it stick. But I needed her to say it out loud, to stop acting and start talking, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. I invited Chloe over for a sisterly talk, bringing a bottle of her favorite expensive wine and a mask of total defeat. I told her I was thinking of moving away, that I knew she had won, and that I just wanted to understand how she did it. It was a bait for her ego, a chance for the predator to gloat over the prey she thought she had finally finished off. As the wine flowed, the mask of the saintly nurse began to slip, replaced by the ugly, arrogant girl I had always known. I had my phone hidden under a stack of magazines, recording every single word of the 14-minute confession that followed. I couldn't believe how easily she admitted to the lie, laughing about how stupid our parents were for believing her nursing stories. She bragged about the tuition money she'd used for trips to Ibiza and the investment fees that were actually her secret savings account. She even laughed about the pearl necklace from when we were 14, admitting she'd framed me just to see if she could get away with it. It was a shocking display of cruelty that confirmed she felt absolutely zero guilt for the betrayal she had inflicted. "They'll never believe you, Jasmine," she sneered, her voice thick with the venom of someone who thought they were untouchable. "To them, you're just the burden, and I'm the light of their lives. I could burn the house down, and they'd blame you for the matches." That was the moment I knew I had her. The ultimate vengeance was now captured in digital stone, ready to be unleashed. I felt a cold sense of justice wash over me as I watched her stumble out of my apartment, thinking she had finally broken me. Little did she know, she had just handed me the keys to her own destruction and the evidence to clear my name once and for all. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a war, and I had the only weapon that mattered: the truth. I spent the rest of the night backing up that recording in 3 different places, my hands shaking with a mix of adrenaline and grief. The betrayal was deeper than I thought, but the path to my own self-worth was finally clear and unobstructed. The family reunion was in 48 hours, and I was going to make sure it was a night no one would ever forget. I woke up the next morning with the weight of the world on my chest, knowing that what I was about to do would shatter my family forever. Part of me wanted to just show my parents in private, to give them a chance to handle the family betrayal with some dignity. But then I remembered the microphone, the only one daughter speech, and the 22 years of being their favorite punching bag. If I did it quietly, they would cover it up, protect Chloe's reputation, and find a way to make me the villain for spying on her. I needed a situation where the truth couldn't be buried, where the shamed reality of their golden child was witnessed by everyone they cared about. I needed the justice to be as public as the humiliation they had forced me to endure my entire life. I contacted my Aunt Ruth, the one person who had always been a bit of an outcast like me, and told her I had a tribute video for the reunion. She was in charge of the tech and the projector, and when I showed her a tiny snippet of the recording, her jaw hit the floor. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said, "It's about time someone turned the lights on in this house." The plan was simple but lethal. Wait for the moment of highest social power, the moment where my father would once again try to bury me. I wasn't doing this for the money or the house. I was doing it for the girl who had to apologize on her knees for a crime she didn't commit. This was about reclaiming my life from the narrative they had spent 3 decades weaving around me. I felt a strange sense of calm as the day of the reunion arrived, a feeling of dignity that I hadn't felt since I was a child. I wasn't the burden today. I was the architect of a shocking revelation that would redefine the word karma for the Thornton family. I dressed in black, a silent mourning for the family I never truly had, and prepared to walk into the lion's den. Every lie Chloe had ever told, every dollar she had stolen, and every moment of infidelity to our bond was about to be aired out. I knew there was no going back once I hit play, but the thought of another year in the shadows was worse than any explosion. The stage was set, the projector was ready, and my heart was so loud I thought the microphone would pick it up. The ballroom was packed, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of polite, fake laughter from 68 Thornton relatives. My father stood up, the same smug look on his face, and began his annual speech about the pride of the family. When he reached the part where he called me a financial drain while praising Chloe's nursing career, I felt the room tilt. He finished his speech with a toast to Chloe, and as the applause began to fade, I stood up and walked toward the front of the room. I could see my mother's face turn pale with annoyance, her eyes telling me to sit down and stop making a scene in public. But I just looked at Aunt Ruth, who was standing by the laptop, and gave her the smallest, most determined nod of my life. "I have a little something to add to the family legacy," I said, my voice steady and clear through the room's sound system. I connected my phone to the projector, and before anyone could protest, the speakers crackled to life with Chloe's drunken, mocking voice. The first thing they heard was her laughing about how stupid my parents were for paying her tuition while she was at the beach. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it could break the floorboards as the shocking truth began to fill every corner of the room. Chloe froze, her glass of wine halfway to her lips, as her own voice detailed the theft of the retirement fund and the framing of the necklace. The betrayal was no longer a secret. It was a 14-minute broadcast that left no room for excuses or lied. I watched my father's face crumble from pride to a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as the daughter he worshipped admitted to ruining him. My mother gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white, the humiliated reality of her favoritism being exposed to every aunt, uncle, and cousin. It was the ultimate payback, a moment of justice so sharp it cut through 22 years of gaslighting in seconds. When the recording ended, the only sound was the hum of the projector and the ragged breathing of a family that had just seen its foundation turn to dust. Chloe tried to scream, to call it a deep fake, but the detail in her voice and the specific dates she mentioned made it impossible to deny. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, finally visible, as the golden child's mask lay shattered on the floor. The silence was broken by the sound of Grandma Edith's cane hitting the floor as she stood up, her face a mask of cold, regal fury. She didn't look at my parents, and she certainly didn't look at the sobbing Chloe. She walked straight toward me with tears in her eyes. "Jasmine," she whispered, her voice carrying through the silent room, "I am so deeply, terribly sorry for every word I ever believed against you." She turned to the entire room and announced that the will would be rewritten that very night, and not a single cent would go to a thief. She demanded that Chloe leave the estate immediately, her voice trembling with the weight of a justice that had been delayed for 14 long years. The family betrayal had finally met its match in the one person whose moral authority couldn't be questioned by anyone. Edith looked at my parents, who were now the ones looking shamed and small, and told them they had failed as protectors of their own blood. She announced a meeting with her lawyers to ensure that my parents' remaining funds were legally protected from further golden child interventions. The karma was swift, brutal, and utterly final, leaving the rest of the family in a state of absolute, wide-eyed shock. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders, not because of the money, but because I was finally heard and believed by someone who mattered. My self-worth wasn't a question anymore. It was a fact that was being validated in front of the very people who tried to destroy it. This was the reclaiming of my name, my history, and my future, all in one single, devastating evening. Chloe was escorted out by two of my cousins, her screams of, "It's not fair," echoing through the hallway like the ghost of a lie that had finally died. Over the following weeks, lawyers stepped in, and the justice wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about the public death of the golden child persona. I stood by Edith's side, the burden no more, as the room began to buzz with the fallout of the truth. The rest of the night was a blur of apologies from relatives who had ignored me for years, and the sight of my parents sitting in stunned, broken silence. Edith took my hand and told me that from now on, I was the one who would help her manage the family's affairs. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like a survivor who had finally reached the shore after 22 years of treading water. The days following the reunion were a whirlwind of fact-checking that only made the shocking reality of Chloe's life even more grotesque. A group of cousins actually called the nursing board and confirmed that there had never been a license, and the university confirmed her expulsion years ago. The lies were so deep that they had become a permanent part of the family's social history, a stain that wouldn't wash out. The family group chat became a war zone, with everyone sharing stories of how Chloe had manipulated them or borrowed money that was never seen again. She tried to go on Facebook and play the victim, claiming I had hacked her and staged the whole thing to steal the inheritance. But the evidence was too strong, and one by one, the relatives she had charmed started to block her and speak the truth. She was isolated, a pariah in a social circle that once worshipped her, feeling the full, cold weight of karma for the first time in her life. People I hadn't spoken to in a decade were calling me to apologize, their voices full of the humiliated realization that they had helped bully a child. I didn't take joy in their pain, but the justice of being vindicated was a medicine my soul had needed for far too long. My parents were forced to face the friends they had bragged to for years, admitting that their star daughter was actually a fraud and a thief. The shamed looks they received at the grocery store and the club were a constant reminder of the price of their blind favoritism and cruelty. They had built their social status on a foundation of backstabbed trust, and now they were the ones living in the wreckage. I watched from a distance as Chloe's life continued to spiral, her golden friends disappearing as soon as the money ran out and the truth came out. She had no skills, no degree, and no family left to bail her out of the hole she had spent years digging for herself. It was a masterclass in payback, a lesson that you can't build a palace on top of someone else's broken bones and expect it to stand. I didn't engage with the online drama or the nasty messages she sent me in the middle of the night. I just let the truth do its work. My dignity was found in my silence, in the way I walked away from the explosion without looking back at the flames. The burden was finally free, and the golden child was finally learning what it meant to actually earn your place in the world. The financial fallout was even worse than the social one, as my parents were forced to hire a forensic accountant, me, to find out exactly where their life savings went. I sat at their kitchen table, the very table where I was once told I wasn't worth the cost of my own birth, and showed them the numbers. We found that Chloe had stolen $400,000 over the last 6 years, a shocking amount of cold-blooded theft. My father had to delay his retirement by 10 years, a reality that seemed to age him a decade in a single afternoon of looking at spreadsheets. They were forced to seek legal counsel to see if they could recover any of the funds, but Chloe had already burned through most of it on her image. The justice of her losing the inheritance was one thing, but the reality of their own poverty was a much harder pill to swallow. Edith made sure that my portion of the estate was placed in a protected trust, while Chloe's inheritance was restructured as a conditional fund. She would only see a cent if she paid back every dollar she stole and completed a verified, multi-year program of psychiatric and vocational rehabilitation. That wasn't revenge, that was accountability. It was a karma that demanded actual change, not just another performance. My parents tried to ask for my forgiveness for the 22 years of neglect, their voices small and full of a desperate newfound need for my help. But I wasn't the same girl who would have done anything for their approval. I was a woman who knew the value of her own self-worth. I helped them secure their remaining assets, but I made it clear that my labor was no longer a gift they could take for granted. The legal battle for the stolen funds was long and messy, exposing even more infidelity to the family name as Chloe's lifestyle was picked apart in court. She ended up with a mountain of legal debt and a reputation that made it impossible for her to find any high-level work in our city. The betrayal she had sown had finally grown into a harvest of consequences that she couldn't charm her way out of. I felt a strange sense of peace as the last of the legal documents were signed, closing the chapter on the Thornton family drama forever. I had done what I needed to do. I protected the innocent, exposed the guilty, and ensured that the truth was the final word. The burden had become the anchor, and the family was finally forced to see the world as it actually was, not as they wanted it to be. I didn't have a movie ending where everyone hugged and the past was forgotten. That's not how real justice or healing actually works. I chose a path of radical honesty and strict boundaries, moving into a small cottage on Grandma Edith's property to help her through her final years. I found my peace in the quiet mornings, the garden, and the knowledge that I never have to lie for anyone ever again. My relationship with my parents is polite, but the warmth they once reserved for Chloe isn't something I'm trying to steal or recreate for myself. I see them once a month for a scheduled lunch where we talk about the weather and the garden, but I don't let them into the deeper parts of my life. My self-worth doesn't depend on their validation anymore, and that is the greatest vengeance I could ever have achieved. Chloe is somewhere in another state, trying to reinvent herself, but the family blackball is strong, and she's finding out that the world doesn't care about golden children. I don't wish her ill, but I don't wish her back into my life either. I've learned that some people are lessons, not lifelong companions. I chose dignity over drama, and for the first time in 28 years, I can breathe without feeling like I'm taking up someone else's air. I spend my time helping other people navigate financial abuse, using my skills to ensure that other burdens have the tools to fight back against their own family betrayal. It's a slow reconstruction of a life that was nearly demolished by favoritism and lied, but every brick I lay is solid and real. I am not the victim of my story anymore. I am the narrator, and I've decided that the final chapter will be about peace. I often think back to that night at the Oakwood Estate, the sound of the recording, and the look on my father's face when the truth finally hit him. It wasn't a moment of joy, but it was a moment of absolute the truth, a shedding of a skin that was too tight and too painful to wear. I am Jasmine. I am a survivor, and I am finally, truly, and completely visible to the only person who matters, myself. The justice I found wasn't just in the money or the estate. It was in the silence of a life lived without the weight of other people's expectations. I walk through the world with my head high, a woman who looked into the heart of a family betrayal and chose to build something beautiful from the ashes. And as I sit with Edith on the porch, watching the sunset, I know that the burden was actually the strongest one all along. This journey wasn't about winning a prize. It was about the raw, visceral justice of finally being seen for who I actually am, not the burden they tried to make me. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you have to protect yourself from the most. I want to know, have you ever been the scapegoat in your own family while someone else got all the credit? Have you ever had to choose between a painful truth and a comfortable lie just to survive? Drop a comment below and share your own stories of family betrayal, or that moment you finally found the courage to stand up for your own self-worth. Your experiences are valid, and seeing how others have navigated these golden child dynamics can be the first step toward healing for all of us. Let's start a real conversation about what it means to find justice when the people closest to you are the ones holding the knife. If this story resonated with you or gave you the strength to look at your own situation with fresh eyes, please subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications. We're diving deep into the complexities of family, vengeance, and the ultimate power of the truth in every video we produce. Don't miss out on the next deep dive into the shadows of family secrets. Stay tuned, stay sharp, and remember that your voice is the most powerful weapon you have.